but please leave a message. Thank you for calling.
Assalamu alaikum. Yo, bad boy, guess what? I'm stressed. I'm really stressed, man. I just can't take no more. The drugs, the crime, everywhere I look, it's just problems. When will someone stand up and be a hero for the Ummah, man?
He's bad, he's brave, he's Hakim. 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 He's bad, he's brave, he's Hakim.
Islamia Media presents a hero for the Ummah, The Adventures of Hakim. Written and read by Khaleel Muhammad. Adventure 1.1, Abdul Hakim and the Drug Dealers. Part 1, Face the Enemy.
He's bad, he's brave, he's Hakim.
It was Friday, the 9th day of Shawwal, when Abdul Hakim arranged to attend Jummah prayers with his best friend, Abdullah. Filling his rucksack with a few items, Abdul Hakim glanced at his bedroom. He cringed a little because it was a bit of a mess, but he made a promise to himself to clean up as soon as he got back. Making his way downstairs, Abdul Hakim could hear his mother, Samaya, in the kitchen. Samaya noticed him put it on his kufi and said, "Assalamu alaikum, son. Off to save the world again, are we?" she said. Abdul Hakim froze in mid-stride. "Nothing that exciting, Mum. We're just going to Jummah prayers." Samaya stopped what she was doing and walked over to him. She was drying her hands. Alhamdulillah, son. Of course, you did say you were going with Abdullah, weren't you? She began to softly run her fingers along the rim of his cap. "Sure, Mum. I'll be back before long, inshallah," he replied. Samaya kissed him on the forehead, turned and made her way back to the kitchen, saying, "You take care now, son." Abdul Hakim smirked and said, "Don't worry, Mum. We'll be fine, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum." "Wa alaikum salam, young man," she said. Stepping out of his front door, Abdul Hakim looked at his watch. He was going to be late. He made his way down the road, turned left and then right at Parsons Grove, and went to number 4, Abdullah's house. Abdullah's father, Ahmed, answered the door. After exchanging salams, they heard Abdullah coming down the hallway, struggling with his bag. "Assalamu alaikum, Yaqi!" shouted Abdullah. Seeing Abdullah entangled in the strap of his bag, Hakim giggled and said, "Wa alaikum salam, brother. Careful or you're going to fall and hurt yourself." Ahmed gave a deep sigh. "Wallahi, I keep telling him to slow down, but he won't listen." Abdullah bounded out the front door. "Yaqi, we're late," he panted. Abdul Hakim shook Abdullah's outstretched hand and said, "I know, brother, but slow down. Allah is merciful, and besides, it's sunnah to walk to the salat even if we're late," he said. The clear sunny day embraced the two brothers as they walked down to the masjid. On their approach, they noticed a small crowd gathered just beyond the main entrance. There were several younger brothers talking to a tall red-headed boy who looked about 18. He was thin and shabbily dressed. Abdul Hakim motioned to Abdullah to slow down. "Abdullah, look! What's happening over there?" Abdullah straightened his glasses and peered at the group of boys. They were now shouting. I don't know. It looks like an argument." Abdullah stuttered. Abdul Hakim tightly gripped the strap of his rucksack and broke out into a light jog. "Uh-oh. Come on, brother. I recognize that tall kid. It's Sharky." The boys arguing didn't notice Abdullah and Hakim approaching them. Sharky spoke. Nah, listen. I don't want your money. The first one's on me, and it's absolutely free. One of the young boys slowly stretched out a hand as Sharky gave him a small brown square or tab with a smiley face printed on it. Sharky grinned and dropped it into his palm. Almost out of nowhere came another hand and slapped the tab on the floor. "Back off!" came Abdul Hakim's voice. He quickly placed himself between Sharky and the group of boys. Sharky stumbled back in utter shock, his face turning the color of his hair. "Oi, what do you think you're doing?" he shouted as he picked up the tab. Abdul Hakim dropped his rucksack on the ground and faced Sharky. Abdullah took the other brothers to one side. Sharky spoke again. "Who the heck are you?" Hakim took one step forward. Sharky towered over him. "My name is Abdul Hakim. I think you'd better leave before we call the police." Sharky stared down at Hakim. His eyes were blazing.
Listen, you little squirt, I think you'd better mind your own business before I slap you.
Hakim breathed in deeply and looked directly into Sharky's eyes and said, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Do we look like smackheads to you? We're Muslims, and true Muslims never take drugs. So unless you want more trouble than you can handle, I suggest you leave right now. There was a heartbeat of silence between the two boys. Rubbing his chin and giggling, Sharky stepped back 2 paces. Everyone could see he was scared.
All right, he said.
But I'll see you soon, Squirt.
Yeah, real soon.
Trying to appear cool, Sharky turned tail and disappeared around a corner. Abdul Hakim gave a massive sigh of relief. The brothers rushed over to him with cries of, Thanks, Hakim! Hakim, you bad! That was great, man! But Abdul Hakim raised his hands and said, No, brothers, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of all the worlds. The brothers rejoiced then with Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah. Abdullah shook Hakim's hand saying, Whoa! That was so cool, brother! I thought you two were gonna rumble! Hakim picked up his rucksack and smiled. A young boy asked him, Wow, Hakim, were you scared of that big boy? Abdul Hakim placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and said, Duh! Yes, of course I was scared, brother. But Allah is our protector. Never forget that. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is neither might nor power except with Allah. All of a sudden, Abdul Hakim could feel the hands of the brothers patting him on the back and urging him into the masjid. Come on, brothers. We've still got Jummah prayers to catch up on, remember? Said Abdullah. But as they entered the masjid, they heard a terrible scream coming from inside. They all froze. What was that? Said one of the young brothers. I don't know. It came from the wudu area, said Abdullah. The group of boys quickly made their way inside. As they entered the wudu area, they were met with a shocking sight. On the drains, just below the seats, was a young boy slumped head down on the tiles. One of the taps was still gushing water and was soaking his legs. Some of the brothers gasped at the sight of the still form lying in a pool of water. Abdul Hakim pushed past Abdullah, who was now turning the tap off. He knelt down and turned the boy over. It was Abdul Rashid. Blood was streaming from his forehead and nose. One of the younger brothers began to cry as Abdul Hakim placed his fingers on Abdul Rashid's throat. He could feel a slight pulse. He was alive. As Hakim turned the boy's head over, a small blue and white capsule, partially dissolved, fell from between his lips. Damn that Sharky, whispered Hakim. He suddenly felt very cold. He could feel tears coming to his eyes. Choking back his grief, Hakim said, Quickly, brothers, call the Imam. Abdul Rashid's taken some drugs. The young brothers were so scared they were frozen to the spot. Hakim shouted this time, Come on, brothers, move it! Abdullah nervously took a few paces backwards, turned and ran to the Imam's office. It was about 8 p.m. by the time Abdul Hakim and Abdul Rashid's family left the hospital. There was Abdul Rashid's father, Mustafa, his mother, Zakiya, and young brother, Munir. Abdul Rashid's mother cried the whole time they were there. Even when the doctor told her that her son would be fine, she didn't calm down. Dr. Braithwaite had explained that the medication Abdul Rashid was taking for his diabetes had caused a violent allergic reaction to the pill he had bought from Sharky, and that had caused him to pass out and hit his face on the hard-tiled floor of the wudu area. Abdul Hakim was met outside by his father, Ibrahim. Assalamu alaikum, son. How's Abdul Rashid? Abdul Hakim forced a smile and said, Wa alaikum salam, Dad. He's going to be fine, inshallah. Ibrahim could see that his son was terribly upset. Abdul Hakim, said his father in a low voice. He was about to say something, but could see that his son was lost in his own thoughts. Abdul Hakim climbed into his father's car and stared at the dashboard. Ibrahim gave his salams to Abdul Rashid's family and came back to the car. Even as they pulled up outside their home, Abdul Hakim remained very quiet. His mind was buzzing with 1,000 questions, but one kept repeating itself over and over again. Why would a good Muslim like Abdul Rashid take drugs? Why? That night, Abdul Hakim found it very difficult to concentrate while reading his Quran. There was a knock at his door. Abdul Hakim looked at it for a few seconds and then told his mother to enter. Sumaya slowly came into the room. "Kayfa halik, son?" she said. He turned away and stared at his Quran. Sumaya went over and sat next to him on his prayer mat. "You're still upset, aren't you?" Abdul Hakim closed his Quran and placed it on the top shelf of his bookcase. He sat back down. "Mum," he started. "Mum, why would Abdul Rashid do that? Take drugs, I mean." Hakim had a look of bewilderment on his face. "I thought Muslims never, take drugs. Why would any Muslim—" Hakim fell silent. Sumaya sighed and said softly, "Son, none of us are safe from the whispers of the shaitan, and some of us are fooled into believing that drugs and alcohol can solve all of our problems. But that is a lie. Knowledge is how we fight these things, and knowledge of the Quran teaches us that this is all a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." She stood up and reached for Abdul Hakim's Quran and opened it at Surah Al-Ankabut, the spider, and read from Ayat 2. "Do men think that they will say we believe, and that they will not be tested?" Hakim looked at his mother's beautiful face as she read. Already he could feel the words of the Quran making sense out of what had happened that day. Sumaya stopped reading. Her loving eyes smiled at Hakim. She spoke. "What happened today was a test for all of us, and it shows just how many problems we have in our ummah. Now more than ever, we need to practice the sunnah of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Hakim nodded and made the same salutations. "That is the rope which we must never let go of, son. Allah only knows how many of our brothers and sisters need us. Even our closest relatives may need help, but we may never know until it's too late." Sumaya paused and lowered her head in silence for a while. There were tears in her eyes. Hakim knew that her brother Philip had died after taking a drug called heroin only 2 years ago. He had fallen into a bad group of boys, much older than himself, who began to experiment with more and more dangerous substances, until one day he took a bad mixture of heroin and died of a massive heart attack. It was Sumaya who found him in the bathroom. Abdul Hakim hugged his mother.
Abdul Hakim and the Drug Dealers, Part 2, The Trap.
Sharky was tripping mad. "What? How did they find out so soon?" he shouted as he threw a newspaper on the bed. Chemist, one of Sharky's boys, picked it up and read the front page headlines. "Local boy scares off drug dealer." "Yo, Sharky, you famous, mate," chuckled Chemist. He turned the paper around for everyone to see. In the room was Sharky's posse, the White Skulls. Jack Spring, Tabs, Magic, Doveboy, and Coca. They began to hoot and whistle, all except Jack Spring. They controlled the area for drug dealing and were a nasty bunch of smackheads. "Sharky, can I have your autograph?" said Magic mockingly. Although the gang found it very funny, Sharky remained deadly serious. They were laughing so hard that none of them noticed him reaching for Chemist. He grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and slammed him against the chest of drawers. "You think it's funny, mate?" shouted Sharky. The laughing stopped. Sharky, what's up, mate? I'm only joking, you know what I mean?" Magic spluttered as he dropped the newspaper. "That snotty-nosed little squirt has made me look like a complete idiot." He dropped Chemist, who was now coughing to get his breath back. Jack Spring stood up and said, "Sharky's right. This is our area for dealing, and if we look like we can't handle a bunch of kids, the NW10s will think we've gone soft. And believe me, if that happens, we're going to have a turf war the likes of which you've never seen before in this town." Everyone's face fell grim. Sharky pulled out his knife. "We have to make an example of that square Hakim." He stabbed his knife in a map hanging on the wall. The blade fell exactly on the spot of the masjid. "We have to teach that little squirt a lesson, so he keeps his big mouth shut. Permanently." Everyone understood exactly what he meant. Rubbing his chin, he continued, "And this is how we're gonna do it." They all gathered around to listen. Hakim's father Ibrahim put the phone on the receiver and called his son. A second later, Abdul Hakim came down the stairs and stood before his father. "Hi, Dad. What's up?" he said. Ibrahim had a smile across his lips. "Son, that was Detective Sergeant Colburn at the local police station. Apparently, he's just been informed by the mayor that they're thinking of giving you a Medal of Bravery for what you did yesterday." Hakim's mouth fell open in utter surprise. "All praise is due to Allah," he whispered. He sat on the stairs blinking in amazement. Ibrahim called Samir and Abdul Hakim's brother, Amma, into the living room and gave them the good news. A second later, the phone rang. Hakim picked it up.
Listen, Squirt.
Even over the phone, Abdul Hakim recognized the voice. It was Sharky.
You'd better meet me at the construction site in half an hour if you care about your four-eyed little friend. And you'd better come by yourself.
The phone went dead. Abdul Hakim's little brother ran into the hallway and said, "Hakim, can I come with you when you got to get your... Hakim?" Ammar looked at the stairs where Hakim was sitting, but he was gone. Abdul Hakim jumped off the 16 bus that passed by the construction site, where an old school once stood. Staying clear of the workmen, Hakim squeezed through a gap in the fence and ran into the site. A cold breeze blew through the half-built houses as Hakim crept under ladders and over wooden floorboards. As he came closer to a clearing, Abdul Hakim heard footsteps running behind him. He turned to see Abdullah run towards him. "Abdullah, are you all right?" said Hakim. Abdullah looked equally surprised to see Hakim. "Yeah, Akhi, what are you doing here?" replied Abdullah. I got here as soon as I could. I got a call from Sharky. He said that I had to get here to help you." Hakim crouched down and pulled Abdullah close. "That's exactly what he said to me. This is a trap. Come on, I think we better leave." The two boys began to make their way out when they heard the sound of running feet all around them. Coming out of the buildings on all sides was Sharky's posse, the White Skulls. A voice bellowed from a doorway. "Oi, Squirt! I want your head!" It was Sharky. He stepped into the clearing with a metal baseball bat resting on his shoulder. Hakim stepped in front of Abdullah. The Skulls began to circle the two boys. They were laughing and jeering. "Beating time for you, boy," said one. "Don't worry, we'll bring you flowers in hospital," said another. Sharky was swinging his bat in the air and rubbing his chin. "I've got 2 words for you, Squirt. Payback." He had a crazed look in his eyes. "You lot, stay back. He's all mine," he said, staring at Hakim. Sharky lunged forward, swinging his bat at Hakim's head. Making a dua for Allah's protection, Abdul Hakim shoved Abdullah on the floor and stepped out of the way of Sharky's bat. Missing his mark, Sharky went headlong into a pile of wooden beams and glass panels. He tumbled noisily with a mighty crash. He screamed like a baby. Finding his way to his feet, he yelled to his posse, "Get him! Smash him!" Hooting and giggling like hyenas, the White Skulls moved in for the kill. The two boys braced themselves. Suddenly, out of the cold night air came the howl of police sirens. The White Skulls froze to the spot. "The police!" said Chemist. Sharky jumped to his feet and yelled, "Come on, you guys, let's go! The cops have my guts for garters if they catch me!" The gang began to scatter as the sound of several police cars got closer and closer. Hakim dived on Sharky's back as he tried to run away, but Sharky twisted and threw him off. He fell in a pile of tarmac and wrenched his arm. He screamed in pain. Looking back, Sharky saw the police talking to Abdullah, who was now pointing in his direction. Hakim crawled to his feet and gave chase to Sharky. They ran through the half-built houses and gardens with the police in close pursuit. Sharky did his best to lose them, but there were just too many. Just ahead of him, he could see a tall fence leading to some railway tracks. The only way over was to climb a crane parked next to the fence. Sharky jumped on the crane and began to climb. As he did so, he kicked a pile of iron beams resting against the fence, hoping to block his escape. The beams fell against other beams, which came crashing down on the crane. But by then, Abdul Hakim had already begun to climb. The fallen beams had prevented the police from climbing up after the two boys. Hakim made a dua to Allah and scurried up the crane. "Sharky, come on down! There's nowhere to go! Why don't you just give yourself up?" he shouted. Sharky was nearly at the top of the crane, about 30 feet above the ground, and said, "Shove off, Squirt! The cops will never get their grubby hands on me!" In his panic, Sharky missed a step and began to fall from the crane. As Allah had willed, Abdul Hakim was close enough to reach out and catch Sharky by his left ankle. The force of Sharky's fall swung him around as Abdul Hakim held on tightly. The tumble Hakim had earlier had sprained his arm, but now, added by the weight of Sharky's fall, Hakim was in great pain. Oh Allah, help us! What a sight! There, 30 feet above the railway tracks, was Sharky screaming and crying in blind panic. And the only thing stopping him from falling to his death was Abdul Hakim. The more Sharky panicked, the more he twisted and struggled, the harder it became for Hakim to hold on.
Sharky, for God's sake, stop struggling! Stop struggling!
Sharky was way too scared to listen.
Don't drop me! Don't drop me!
He screamed. Hakim began to sweat heavily.
Sharky, please, you've got to stop struggling. I can't hold on to you much longer.
The pain in Hakim's arm was now shooting across his back. He could feel himself losing grip on Sharky's ankle. The pain became so great that he almost passed out.
Allah help us! Allah help us! Allah help us!
He whispered. Sharky continued to struggle in blind panic. Below them they could hear the faint rumble of a freight train approaching their position. It would be seconds before it would be rumbling underneath them. Hakim had an idea. Bracing his hand against the beam of the crane, Hakim began to swing Sharky from left to right. From the ground, Abdullah and the police were shouting at him to hold on. Some of the policemen and site workers had moved the beams and were now climbing up the crane. By now, Sharky could feel himself swinging from side to side.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
He screamed. The swinging motion increased the strain on Hakim's arm, but he did not stop. He swung harder and harder as the train rumbled underneath them. At the last moment, when he could hold on no longer, Hakim let go of Sharky, who was now screaming at the top of his lungs. Abdullah could not bear to look and turned away. Sharky went sailing through the air almost in slow motion. Abdul Hakim passed out and began to fall from the crane, but was caught by a police officer. Sharky landed in the passing freight train. He fell flat on his back in a car filled with sand. Back on the ground, the police raided for the train to be stopped and for Sharky to be picked up. The rest of his gang was safely tucked away in police vans. Abdul Hakim awoke in a hospital bed an hour later. His arm was in a sling and was very sore. "Assalamu alaikum, son," came his mother's voice. Hakim sat up in bed, blinking to see his whole family there, including Abdullah. "Mum, Dad, Amma, Abdullah, what happened?" Hakim's mother placed her hand on his forehead and said, "My darling, may Allah bless you. You saved that boy's life. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you." By the time they were through explaining what had happened, like how the police knew they were at the construction site, by tracing Sharky's mobile phone, it was time for everyone to leave. Hakim's father left him with a few words from the Holy Quran. "What you did tonight was a great deed, son. Allah has said in his book, 'Whosoever saved a life, it would be as if he had saved the life of a whole people.'" Abdul Hakim thought long and hard about Allah's blessings until his eyelids grew heavy and he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep.
The Adventures of Hakim is released by Islamia Media. Written and read by Khaleel Muhammad. Sound engineer is Najib Bateman. Project manager Tayyib Shah. Incidental music Abdul Latif Whiteman. To order further copies of this tape or for more information, please call 0171 700 7586. The Adventures of Hakim. A hero for the Ummah. Welcome to the front.